Welcome, dear listeners, to The Phantom of the Village Fête, a Miss Marple mystery. Settle into your favorite armchair with a warm cup of tea and allow yourself to be transported to the idyllic English countryside of the 1950s. In the charming village of St. Mary Mead, our astute elderly detective, Miss Jane Marple, employs her unparalleled powers of observation to unravel a most perplexing enigma. This cozy tale of intellectual intrigue, filled with the warmth of village life and the satisfaction of clever deduction, is narrated for your enjoyment. Let us begin our journey. Chapter 1. The Fête Awakens. In the gentle embrace of St. Mary Mead, a quaint English village nestled among the verdant hills of rural England, the summer of 1952 unfolded with its customary charm. The village, a tapestry of thatched cottages and winding lanes, pulsed with anticipation for the annual fête, a cherished tradition that drew every soul from the cobblestone streets to the vibrant green at its heart. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and freshly mown grass, and the sun cast a golden glow over the scene, as if blessing the festivities with its warmth. Miss Jane Marple, a slight elderly spinster with a crown of soft white hair and eyes that gleamed with quiet acuity, sat poised on a wrought iron bench beneath an ancient oak. Her knitting needles moved with rhythmic precision, crafting a delicate shawl, while her gaze roamed the bustling fête. To the untrained eye, she was merely another villager enjoying the day. But those who knew her understood that Miss Marple missed nothing. Her mind, sharp as the needles in her hands, catalogued every detail: the flutter of a glance, the timbre of a laugh, the weight of a pause in conversation. The village green was a kaleidoscope of activity. Bunting in cheerful reds and blues swayed in the breeze, strung between trees and lampposts. Stalls lined the perimeter, their tables laden with homemade treasures: jars of ruby-red strawberry jam, golden honey from Mr. Beecher's hives, and knitted scarves in every. Manners contrasted sharply with the village's rustic simplicity. Timothy's tailored suit and easy smile drew admiring glances, though Miss Marple noted a certain restlessness in his posture, as if he longed to be elsewhere. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as the judging began. Mrs. Eleanor Finch, the schoolteacher, adjusted her spectacles nervously as her jar of strawberry jam awaited scrutiny. Vicar Samuel Layton, a gentleman with a kindly smile, presented a bouquet of roses from his vicarage garden. Dr. Elias Thorne, the village physician, stood nearby, his wiry frame and sharp beard lending him an air of quiet intensity. Miss Lydia Voss, a newcomer artist with a bohemian frail, hovered near her display of wildflower sketches, her eyes darting about as if seeking something or someone. The atmosphere was one of camaraderie, yet Miss Marple sensed undercurrents of tension, subtle as the ripples on the village pond. As the colonel sampled a spoonful of Mrs. Finch's jam, praising its robust sweetness, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. From the shadowed edge of the churchyard, adjacent to the green, emerged a spectral figure. It was cloaked in ethereal white, its form indistinct yet unmistakably human, gliding with eerie grace toward the prize table. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as the figure, dubbed the Phantom, in an instant of collective imagination, seized the silver trophy for best marrow, a gleaming cup engraved with curling vines. Before anyone could react, it vanished into the mist rolling in from the meadows, leaving only whispers and wide-eyed stares in its wake. "The Phantom of the Fête!" exclaimed Mrs. Price, the village gossip, her hand clutching her pearls as though they might anchor her to reality. Her cry sparked a flurry of murmurs, with some villagers crossing themselves and others laughing nervously, dismissing it as a prank. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze fixed on the spot where the figure had disappeared. A theatrical distraction, she mused, recalling a similar incident from her youth involving a staged haunting to cover a petty theft. But the merriment shattered moments later. Colonel Hargrove, still standing by the prize table, took another taste of the jam, of the phantom's curse. Inspector Craddock, who happened to be present enjoying a rare day off, took charge, directing villagers to step back as he secured the scene. His young, earnest face was taut with determination, though Miss Marple noted a flicker of unease in his eyes. Murder was rare in St. Mary Mead, and a public poisoning under the guise of a ghostly apparition was unprecedented. Miss Marple rose from her bench, tucking her knitting into her basket. She approached the marquee, her steps measured but purposeful, her mind already sifting through the morning's observations. The jar of jam, labeled with Mrs. Finch's precise handwriting, sat innocently on the table, its contents now a deadly enigma. The trophy was gone, and the phantom's fleeting appearance seemed too convenient, too staged. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the crowd. Mrs. Finch, pale and fidgeting, the vicar murmuring prayers, Dr. Thorne wiping his hands as if to erase the tragedy, Timothy, his face a mask of shock, and Miss Voss sketching absently, her pencil moving as if to capture the chaos. "Dear me," Miss Marple murmured to herself, her voice soft as the breeze. A most curious affair. Poison in the jam, a phantom in the churchyard, and a village full of secrets. One must observe closely, for the truth often hides in the everyday. She noted a detail others overlooked, a faint smudge of white powder on the grass near the table, not unlike the chalk dust used by artists. And there, half hidden by a fold of bunting, was a single white glove, embroidered with the initials L.V. Lydia Voss, perhaps? Miss Marple slipped it into her pocket, her mind weaving connections as deftly as her knitting. The fête, meant to be a celebration of community, had become the stage for a meticulously planned crime, and she was determined to unravel its threads. As the crowd dispersed, some whispering of curses and others of human malice, Miss Marple returned to her bench, her needles resuming their quiet rhythm. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and familiar faces, would smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Yet her thoughts were far from the tranquility of her surroundings, focused instead on the chilling events of the previous day. Miss Marple's garden, a haven of order with its tidy flower beds and clipped hedges, was her sanctuary for reflection. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes scanning the village beyond her gate. The fête's aftermath had left a palpable unease, and she knew that answers lay not in grand gestures, but in the quiet details of village life. The sort of details others overlooked, but which she, with her unerring instinct, found illuminating. A knock at the gate interrupted her musings. Inspector Craddock, the young county policeman, stepped into the garden, his hat in hand, and a look of determined respect on his face. Though he maintained an air of official skepticism, he had come to value Miss Marple's insights, gleaned from years of observing human nature in St. Mary Mead. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice crisp but warm. "I trust you're well, despite yesterday's shocking events." "Quite well, thank you, Inspector," she replied, gesturing to a wicker chair. "Though I confess, a murder at our fête is most unsettling. Please, sit. Would you care for tea?" Craddock declined politely, settling into the chair with a notebook in hand. "This phantom business," he began, "is nonsense. Of course a distraction, likely. But the poison in the jam, that's deliberate murder." The jar was entered by Mrs. Eleanor Finch, the schoolteacher. She insists it was untainted when she submitted it for judging. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest, though her expression remained serene. "People are not always what they seem, Inspector. A jar of jam, so innocent in appearance, can hide many secrets. Pray, Tell me about those who might have had cause to harm the colonel." Craddock flipped open his notebook, his tone methodical. "We've identified several persons of interest. First, Mrs. Finch herself. She's in her 40s, prim, dedicated to the school. But there's talk of a dispute with Colonel Hargrove over funding for repairs. There's Timothy Hargrove, the colonel's nephew and heir. He's been in London, running up debts, or so the gossip goes. The colonel's estate would solve his troubles nicely." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Young men with debts can be reckless, but poison requires calculation. And is there anyone else?" "One more," Craddock said. "Miss Lydia Voss, an artist who moved here 6 months ago. She paints landscapes on the green and had a disagreement with the colonel over an easement on his land for her access to a painting spot. She's a bit of an enigma, keeps to herself mostly." "An outsider," Miss Marple murmured, her mind turning over the names like pieces of a puzzle. "Thank you, Inspector. You've given me much to consider." As Craddock rose to leave, Miss Marple's gaze fell to the path beyond her gate. There, half hidden in the grass, lay a white glove, its delicate fabric embroidered with the initials LV. Lydia Voss, perhaps? She bent to retrieve it, her movements deliberate, and tucked it into her apron pocket. "One never knows what small things may prove significant," she said, more to herself than to Craddock. The inspector tipped his hat and departed, promising to keep her informed. Miss Marple returned to her tea, her thoughts weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The glove was a curious find, its presence near her cottage suggesting carelessness or intent. She recalled Miss Voss at the fête, her bohemian scarf fluttering as she sketched, her eyes darting about as if searching for something beyond her canvas. And Mrs. Finch, so insistent her jam was pure, yet had she not seemed overly anxious when presenting it. The village, with its cozy familiarity, was a microcosm of human nature, and Miss Marple knew that motives often hid in plain sight. She thought of her old friend, Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that village life was like a stage, where everyone played a part, but not always the one they appeared to. The phantom, the poison, the stolen trophy. These were not random acts, but threads in a carefully spun web. As noon approached, Miss Marple set aside her knitting. Miss Marple smiled gently. "Ghosts are convenient scapegoats, Mrs. Price. But I suspect human hands at work. Tell me, did you see anyone near the prize table before the incident?" Mrs. Price frowned, thinking. "Well, Miss Voss was sketching nearby, and Timothy Hargrove was loitering about. Oh, and the vicar passed by, fussing with his roses. But nothing unusual, I suppose?" "Nothing unusual," Miss Marple echoed, though her mind seized on the details. She thanked Mrs. Price and continued her walk, her eyes scanning the green for further clues. Near the spot where the trophy had stood, she noticed a faint smudge of white powder chalk, perhaps, or something more sinister. It was too fine to be mere dust, and she recalled that cyanide in certain forms could appear similarly innocuous. Returning home, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resumed as her thoughts churned. The suspects each had motives, however slight, and the phantom's appearance suggested a flair for the dramatic. She recalled a case from her youth, when a staged haunting had masked a theft in St. Mary Mead. Was this phantom a similar ruse, meant to distract from the true crime? And the glove, had it been dropped carelessly, or placed to mislead? As the afternoon light faded, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind as clear as the crystal vase on her mantel. The murder of Colonel Hargrove was no accident, nor was the phantom's appearance. Someone in St. Mary Mead had orchestrated a deadly performance, and she was determined to uncover the truth, stitch by careful stitch, through the quiet observation of the village's everyday rhythms. Chapter 3. Tea and Testimonies. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of the vicarage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. The village, still reeling from the shocking events of the Fête 2 days prior, sought solace in routine, and the vicarage tea gathering was a steadfast tradition, even in the shadow of tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, her white hair neatly pinned and her tweed skirt impeccable, arrived promptly at 3 o'clock, her basket of knitting tucked under her arm. Inflection. Vicar Layton, a slight man in his 50s with mild eyes and a clerical collar slightly askew, poured tea with a trembling hand. "Such a tragedy," he murmured, passing a cup to Mrs. Eleanor Finch, the schoolteacher. "The colonel was a pillar of our community, steadfast in his way." Mrs. Finch, her spectacles perched precariously on her nose, nodded vigorously, though her fingers fidgeted with the handle of her teacup. "Indeed, Vicar, though he could be stubborn. That school roof still leaks, you know. Dreadful for the children." Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. Mrs. Finch's tone held a hint of resentment, carefully veiled but unmistakable. The schoolteacher's dispute with Colonel Hargrove over funding was well known, and Miss Marple wondered if pride, rather than greed, might fuel a deeper motive. Dr. Elias Thorne, the village physician, leaned back in his chair, his wiry frame taut, and his sharp beard accentuating his angular face. He chuckled dryly, though his eyes remained guarded. "We all had our differences with Reginald. He was a man of firm opinions. But poison? Ghastly business, utterly beneath us." Miss Marple noted the doctor's choice of words, "beneath us," as if distancing himself from the act. She recalled his quarrel with the colonel over a land boundary, a seemingly trivial matter that had sparked heated words. Dr. Thorne's quick response at the Fête, diagnosing cyanide poisoning with such certainty, suggested a knowledge that might extend beyond medical expertise. Timothy Hargrove, the colonel's nephew, lounged by the window, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his tie loosened in a gesture of casual defiance. His handsome face, framed by dark curls, bore the strain of recent events, though his voice carried a practiced nonchalance. Uncle was set in his ways, no doubt. But who would go to such lengths over a village squabble? It's absurd. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Timothy. His London debts were the subject of village gossip, and, as the colonel's heir, he stood to gain the most from the tragedy. Yet his demeanor suggested a man more guessed, offering platitudes about the colonel, while subtly deflecting suspicion. Miss Marple listened, her knitting a steady rhythm, her mind sifting through the nuances of their words. She recalled a similar gathering years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a seemingly innocent tea party had revealed a thief through a single misplaced remark. Human nature, she knew, was as predictable as it was complex, and the truth often lay in what was left unsaid. Mrs. Finch, perhaps emboldened by the tea, spoke again. "My jam was perfect when I prepared it," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I tasted it myself the night before, and it was divine. Someone must have tampered with it after I submitted it." Miss Marple's needles stilled. A slip, perhaps. If Mrs. Finch had tasted the jam the night before, as she claimed, why was she so certain it was untainted at the Fête? Cyanide, Miss Marple knew, was swift and subtle, but preparing it required precision. Could Mrs. Finch's insistence be a defense or a deflection? The vicar, stirring his tea, avoided eye contact when the subject of church funds arose. "The colonel was generous in spirit," he said, his voice strained. though his priorities sometimes differed from ours. The church roof will wait, I suppose. Miss Marple noted the vicar's discomfort. His request for restoration funds had been denied by the colonel, a fact that had caused quiet ripples in the village. Yet his gentle demeanor seemed at odds with the calculation required for murder. Or was it? She recalled a curate from her youth whose mild manners had masked a surprising capacity for deceit. Dr. Thorne interjected, his tone brisk. "Let's not dwell on petty disputes. The police are investigating, and I'm sure they'll find the culprit. Likely some outsider stirring trouble." "An outsider?" Timothy scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "This is St. Mary Mead, Doctor. We're a closed circle. It's one of us I'd pencil still." "Thank you, Mrs. Layton," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "You've been most helpful." Stepping into the cool afternoon air, Miss Marple walked slowly toward the village green, her mind alive with possibilities. The vicarage tea had been a stage, each suspect playing a part, but the truth lay in their unguarded moments. Mrs. Finch's slip about the jam, the vicar's evasiveness, Dr. Thorne's quick deflection, Timothy's bold accusation, Miss Voss's vague denial, each was a clue, subtle but significant. She paused by the churchyard where the yews stood sentinel over weathered gravestones. The footprints she had noticed earlier were still visible, though fainter now, their edges blurred by the morning's dew. They were small, delicate, suggesting a woman's shoe or a deliberate attempt to mislead. Nearby, a discarded paintbrush lay in the grass, its bristles stained with a bluish hue. Miss Marple bent to examine it, noting its similarity to the artist's pigments she had seen in Miss Voss's sketches. Cyanide, she knew, could be derived from certain compounds used in art, though such knowledge was rare in a village like St. Mary Mead. As she straightened, Miss Marple's gaze fell on the green, where the marquee's remnants had been cleared. The village was returning to its quiet routine, but the specter of murder lingered. She thought of her old friend, Miss Hartnell, who once said that St. Mary Mead held more secrets than a city, for its smallness magnified every slight, every ambition. The phantom was no ghost, Miss Marple was certain, but a human hand cloaked in theatrics. The question was, whose and why? Returning to her cottage, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. The tea party had revealed much, but the puzzle was far from complete. The glove, the footprints, the paintbrush, the powder, each was a piece, and she would fit them together with the patience of one who knew that truth, like a well-knitted shawl, required time and care to craft. Chapter 4. Shadows of Suspicion. 4 days after the fateful village fête, St. Mary Mead settled into an uneasy grand revelations, but in the quiet details of everyday life. The white glove, embroidered with LV, the small footprints near the churchyard, the bluish paintbrush, and the smudge of white powder near the prize table. These were the clues she carried in her mind, each a stitch in the pattern she sought to unravel. As she approached the churchyard where the phantom had made its dramatic appearance, Miss Marple paused to survey the scene. The ancient yews cast long shadows, and the gravestones, weathered by centuries, stood as silent witnesses. The footprints she had noted earlier were nearly gone, eroded by recent drizzle. But their memory lingered. Too small for a man's, they suggested a woman's shoe, or a clever disguise. She recalled a case from her youth in St. Mary Mead, where a staged haunting had masked a theft, and wondered if this phantom was a similar ruse, designed to distract from the true crime. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Inspector Craddock striding across the green, his young face etched with frustration. "Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his hat. "I've just come from questioning Mrs. Finch again." She's adamant her jam was untainted, but we found no evidence of tampering at the fête itself. The jar was sealed when she submitted it. Sealed, you say? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. Yet poison found its way inside. Curious, don't you think, Inspector? Perhaps the tampering occurred earlier, or the seal was not as secure as she claims. Craddock frowned, jotting a note. We're also looking into the phantom. Some villagers swear it's a ghost, tied to an old Hargrove family legend about a wronged tenant. Nonsense, of course, but it's muddying the waters. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Ghosts are convenient, Inspector, but human motives are far more reliable. Have you considered the trophy's theft? It seems an odd detail, yet deliberate. Craddock nodded. We're searching for it, but no luck yet. Whoever took it knew the fête's chaos would cover their tracks. As he departed, Miss Marple continued her walk, her mind turning to the suspects. Mrs. Eleanor Finch, the schoolteacher. Pleasant surprise, though I suppose you're here about that dreadful business. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. Your jam was exquisite, Mrs. Finch. Did you notice anyone near the prize table before the judging? Someone, perhaps, who lingered too long? Mrs. Finch's cheeks flushed. No, not really, though that artist, Miss Voss, was sketching nearby. She seemed awfully curious about the displays, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, noting the deflection. And your jam, prepared with such care. You tasted it the night before, you said? Yes, and it was perfect, Mrs. Finch replied, her voice firm but her eyes darting away. I can't imagine how it was poisoned. As Miss Marple thanked her and left, she spotted a bottle of artist's pigment on a shelf, cyanide blue, used in painting. An innocent coincidence, or something more? She recalled that cyanide could be derived from certain chemical compounds, though such knowledge was rare in a village setting. Mrs. Finch's insistence on her jam's purity seemed almost too vehement, as if masking a deeper truth. Back on the green, Miss Marple encountered Timothy Hargrove, his hands in his pockets, his expression brooding. Miss Marple, he said, forcing a smile. Trying to solve Uncle's murder, are you? I'd wager it's that doctor always arguing with him over that land. A possibility, Miss Marple said mildly. Though motives are often more complex than they appear. You knew your uncle well, I presume. Timothy shrugged. Well enough. He was stubborn, but fair. I didn't need him dead to sort my affairs. His casual tone struck Miss Marple as rehearsed, and she noted a faint tremor in his hand. Debt could drive desperate acts, she knew, but poison required a cold precision. Timothy seemed too impulsive to muster. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, settling by her fire with her knitting. The village's warmth, its familiar faces and routines, belied the darkness beneath. She thought of the glove, now hidden in her drawer, its LV initials pointing to Miss Voss. Yet the artist's quiet demeanor and vague denials, Timothy's bold accusation, Miss Voss's detached observation, each was a clue, subtle but significant. The trophy's theft, too, nagged at her. Why take it unless it held some hidden value or served as a misdirection? Outside, the village settled into dusk, its lights twinkling like stars against the gathering dark. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. The murder of Colonel Hargrove was a puzzle of human nature, its pieces scattered across the everyday life of St. Mary Mead. She would gather them patiently, knowing that the truth, like a well-crafted shawl, required time to take shape. Chapter 5. False Trails in the Fog. 5 days after the tragic events of the St. Mary Mead village fête, a dense fog settled over the village, cloaking its thatched cottages and winding lanes in a ghostly veil. The air was heavy with damp, muffling the usual sounds of morning birdsong, the clatter of milk bottles, the chatter of neighbors. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, wrapped her shawl tightly, and set out from her cottage, her sturdy umbrella in hand. Her knitting basket remained at home, for today her focus was singular: to sift through the fog of suspicion clouding the murder of Colonel Hargrove. The cyanide-laced jam, the spectral phantom, and the stolen silver trophy formed a puzzle that demanded her keen observation, and she knew the truth lay hidden in the village's quiet corners. The green, usually a hub of activity, was subdued, its grass slick with mist. Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the clues she had gathered: the white glove with LV initials, the small footprints in the churchyard, the bluish paintbrush, and the smudge of white powder near the prize table. Each suggested a calculated crime, the phantom a theatrical distraction to mask the poisoning. She recalled a similar case from her youth, where a staged apparition had concealed a theft, and wondered if this phantom served a dual purpose: diversion and deception. Her steps led her to the village shop, where Mrs. Price, the indefatigable gossip, was arranging jars of sweets behind the counter. "Miss Marple!" she nerve. She thanked Mrs. Price and stepped back into the fog, her mind turning to the arrest. Was it a genuine breakthrough, or a false trail laid to mislead? At the police station, a modest building near the green, Miss Marple found Inspector Craddock reviewing reports. His youthful face was lined with fatigue, but he greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, I suppose you've heard about the vicar. The evidence is compelling. A vial of cyanide hidden in a vestry cupboard, and his prints on it. He admits to handling it, says he found it and meant to report it." "Dear me," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "And yet, Inspector, consider the glove I mentioned, the one with LV initials." The vicar's hands tremble. Could he manage the delicate task of poisoning a sealed jar? And why leave such evidence in plain sight? Craddock rubbed his chin, his confidence wavering. "You've a point. The vial seems almost too convenient. But his motive is clear, and he was seen near the marquee." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Motives are plentiful in St. Mary Mead, Inspector. We must look beyond the obvious. Have you traced the trophy's whereabouts?" "Not yet," Craddock admitted. "It's vanished, like that phantom. We're searching the churchyard and nearby fields, but the fog's not helping." As she left the station, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The vial's discovery felt staged, a red herring to divert suspicion. She recalled the vicar's unease at the tea party, his avoidance of the church funds topic. Guilt or merely discomfort? Her instincts leaned toward the latter, but she needed more to unravel the truth. Her walk took her past Dr. Thorne's cottage, where she overheard a heated exchange. Timothy Hargrove's voice, sharp with accusation, carried through the fog. "You owed Uncle money, Thorne. Don't deny it. He told me himself." Dr. Thorne's reply was icy. "And you stand to inherit everything, Timothy. Convenient, isn't it? Pointing fingers at me." Miss Marple paused, hidden by the fog, her ears attuned to the confrontation. Timothy's debts and Dr. Thorne's boundary dispute were well known. Linked to these clues, or was someone planting them to implicate her? At her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire. Her knitting resumed as a backdrop to her thoughts. The fog outside mirrored the case's murkiness, with false leads obscuring the truth. The vicar's arrest felt premature, the vial too conveniently placed. She recalled a conversation with her friend, Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that villages hid their secrets in plain sight, disguised as routine. The phantom, the poison, the trophy, all were part of a performance, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the director. She considered the suspects anew. Mrs. Finch's insistence on her jam's purity was almost too emphatic, her slip about tasting it a potential clue. The vicar's gentle nature clashed with the crime's precision, though his arrest suggested someone wished him blamed. Dr. Thorne's medical expertise made him a candidate, but his forthright manner seemed at odds with deception. Timothy's inheritance provided a strong motive, yet his recklessness suggested a lack of subtlety. Miss Voss, with her artist's pigments and the glove's initials, remained an enigma, her quiet observation at the tea party masking either innocence or guile. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her thoughts as precise as her stitches. The trophy's theft nagged at her. Why steal it, unless it held significance beyond its silver? She recalled a village fair years ago, where a stolen prize had concealed a smuggler's cash. Was the trophy a distraction, or a key to the motive? And the phantom? Its appearance was too perfectly timed, suggesting someone familiar with the fête's rhythm. As evening deepened, the fog thickened, wrapping St. Mary Mead in silence. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the everyday observations that held the truth. The glove, the fabric, the footprints, the powder, the paintbrush. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. She thought of her nephew, Raymond, who once said that village life was a game of patience, where the smallest move revealed the player's intent. Knitting lay idle on the table, for her mind was wholly occupied with the puzzle before her. A poisoned jar of jam, a spectral phantom, a stolen silver trophy, and a web of motives woven through the quiet lives of St. Mary Mead. The clues she had gathered, the white glove with LV initials, the small footprints in the churchyard, the bluish paintbrush, the scrap of white fabric, and the smudge of powder, pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, and she was determined to uncover its architect. Miss Marple's morning walk took her to the cottage of Miss Lydia Voss, the enigmatic artist whose presence at the fête and connection to the glove made her a figure of particular interest. The cottage, a quaint structure with ivy climbing its walls, stood at the edge of the village, its garden a riot of wildflowers that seemed to reflect Miss Voss's bohemian spirit. As Miss Marple knocked, she noted a canvas propped against the porch, depicting the village green in vibrant hues. The detail was striking, but her eyes were drawn to a figure in the background, a cloaked shape, eerily reminiscent of the phantom, painted with an intimacy that suggested observation, not imagination. Miss Voss answered the door, her scarf loosely knotted and her dark eyes wary but polite. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," she said, her voice soft. "Do come in. Would you like tea?" "Thank you, my dear," Miss Marple replied, stepping into a studio cluttered with canvases, brushes, and jars of pigment. The air smelled faintly of turpentine, and a half-finished painting of the churchyard stood on an easel. "Your work is remarkable. I see you captured the fête. Such a vivid scene." Miss Voss smiled faintly, pouring tea from a chipped pot. "I paint what I see. The fête was lively, until, well, you know." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the room. A jar of blue pigment caught her attention, its label faded but legible. A compound sometimes used in artists' paints, from which cyanide could be derived with the right knowledge. "You were near the prize table, I believe," she said mildly. Artist's calm demeanor suggested either innocence or a masterful performance. As she left the cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the other suspects. The vicar's arrest, based on a conveniently placed vial of cyanide, felt like a misdirection, his gentle nature at odds with the crime's precision. Mrs. Finch's vehement defense of her jam raised questions, especially her claim of tasting it beforehand. Dr. Thorne's medical knowledge made him a candidate, but his blunt manner seemed ill-suited to theatrics. Timothy Hargrove's debts and inheritance provided motive, yet his impulsiveness clashed with the murder's calculation. Her walk led her back to the churchyard, where the yews stood sentinel over the gravestones. The footprints she had noted earlier were gone, washed away by rain, but the thorn bush where she found the fabric scrap was unchanged. She examined it again, noting a faint stain on the ground nearby, bluish, like the pigment in Miss Voss's studio. Could the artist have used her materials to concoct the poison, disguising her actions as part of her craft? Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth where a chemist's assistant had used his trade to conceal a crime, and wondered if Miss Voss's paints held a similar secret. At the village hall, Miss Marple encountered Inspector Craddock, who was reviewing statements from Fête attendees. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone weary, "the vicar's case is unraveling. His prints were on the vial, but he swears he found it in the vestry and meant to report it. No one saw him near the jam." "A convenient discovery," Miss Marple murmured, almost as if someone wished him implicated. "Have you searched Miss Voss's cottage? Her paints are interesting." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You think she's involved?" "She's been cooperative, but vague. We'll look into it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the trophy. Its theft seemed peripheral, yet deliberate. She recalled a village fair years ago, where a stolen prize had been a diversion for a larger scheme. Was the trophy a distraction, or did it hold a clue to the motive? She decided to visit the Hargrove estate, where Timothy resided. Then sentiment, perhaps a message, or a cover for something else. She thanked Timothy and left, her mind returning to Miss Voss's painting. The phantom's depiction was too precise, its presence too central to be mere artistic license. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resumed as a rhythm to her thoughts. The fog of suspicion was lifting, but false trails abounded. The vicar's arrest was a misstep, the vial a planted distraction. Mrs. Finch's slip about the jam, Dr. Thorne's expertise, Timothy's motive, all were plausible. Yet none fully explained the phantom's role. Miss Voss, with her paints and the glove, was a thread that tugged at her intuition. She recalled a conversation with her friend Miss Hartnell, who once said that artists saw the world differently, their observations both a gift and a mask. Miss Voss's painting suggested she saw more than she admitted. But was she the murderer, or a witness to something she feared to reveal? The bluish stain, the fabric, the footprints all pointed to the churchyard, where the phantom had emerged. As evening fell, Miss Marple lit a lamp, its glow casting shadows on her parlor walls. The mystery was a tapestry, its threads tangled but not unbreakable. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who likened village life to a novel, where every character played a part. The phantom was a character, scripted to distract, and Miss Marple was determined to unmask its creator. With the glove, the fabric, and the painting as her guides, she would follow the clues, stitch by stitch, until the truth emerged from the shadows of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 7. Threads of Truth. A week had passed since the shocking murder of Colonel Hargrove at the St. Mary Mead village fête, and the village, though resuming its gentle rhythms, remained cloaked in an air of quiet suspicion. The morning sun bathed the cobblestone lanes in golden light, glinting off the dew-kissed roses in Miss Jane Marple's garden. She stood at her gate, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders, her knitting basket tucked under her arm. The events of the past days, the poisoned jam, the spectral phantom, and earnest denials proved his improbability as the culprit. The artist, Miss Lydia Voss, with her detailed painting of the phantom and the incriminating glove, remained a focal point, yet her calm demeanor suggested either innocence or cunning. Mrs. Eleanor Finch's slip about tasting her jam, Dr. Elias Thorne's medical expertise, and Timothy Hargrove's financial motives each held weight, but none fully explained the phantom's theatrical role. Her steps led her to the village hall, where a small gathering was underway to plan the church restoration fund, a project dear to the vicar's heart. Miss Marple, invited as a respected resident, took a seat near the back, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the attendees. The vicar, now released from custody, presided with a weary smile, his gratitude for the community's support evident. Mrs. Finch, her spectacles glinting, spoke passionately about community spirit, though her voice faltered when the colonel's name arose. Dr. Thorne, seated stiffly, offered a donation, but remained terse, his eyes scanning the room. Timothy Hargrove was absent, a fact Miss Marple noted with interest, while Miss Voss sat quietly, sketching in a small notebook, her pencil moving with deliberate care. During a lull, Miss Marple approached the vicar, her tone gentle. "Mr. Layton, I'm so pleased to see you restored to us. Tell me, did you notice anyone unusual near the churchyard before the fête? Perhaps someone preparing a costume?" The vicar's mild eyes widened slightly. "A costume? Well, I did see Miss Voss there the morning of the fête, adjusting her easel. She seemed preoccupied, but I thought nothing of it. Artists, you know, are often lost in their work." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. Miss Voss's presence in the churchyard, so close to the phantom's emergence, was no coincidence. She thanked the vicar and turned her attention to Mrs. Finch, who was arranging pamphlets. "Mrs. Finch," she said, "your jam was such a triumph, despite the tragedy. Did you prepare it alone, or did someone assist you?" Mrs. Finch's cheeks' best marrow had seemed a trivial detail, yet its absence nagged at her. Could it be connected to this key, or was it another false trail? Her next stop was the Hargrove estate, where Timothy resided. The manor's grandeur was tempered by an air of neglect, its gardens overgrown since the colonel's death. Timothy greeted her at the door, his charm tinged with impatience. "Miss Marple, still sleuthing?" "I've told the police everything. I was nowhere near the jam." "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I was merely wondering about your uncle's trophies. The marrow cup, was it particularly valuable to him?" Timothy shrugged, his eyes darting away. "Just a bauble, really. He was proud of his garden, but it was no heirloom. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple noted his unease, a flicker of something unspoken. "No reason," she said lightly. "Though its theft seems curious, don't you think?" As she left, she noticed a gardening shed behind the manor, its door slightly ajar. Peering inside, she spotted a jar of fertilizer, its label listing a chemical compound that, in skilled hands, could be distilled into cyanide. Timothy's access to the shed was undeniable, but his impulsive nature seemed at odds with the crime's precision. Still, the discovery was a thread worth following. Returning to the village, Miss Marple encountered Dr. Thorne leaving his cottage, a medical bag in hand. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone brisk, "I hear you're poking about. The police should focus on facts, not village gossip." "Facts are my guide, Doctor," she replied. "Your expertise at the fête was remarkable, identifying cyanide so quickly. Few would recognize it so readily." Dr. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "It's my profession to know such things." The colonel's symptoms were unmistakable. Convulsions, rapid collapse. I only wish I could have saved him. His sincerity seemed genuine, yet Miss Marple noted a defensive edge. His knowledge of poisons was a double-edged sword, making him both capable and suspect. She thanked him and continued her walk, her mind turning to Miss Voss's painting. The possibility that Miss Voss had painted the phantom not from imagination, but from memory, perhaps as a way to process what she had seen or done. Yet the schoolhouse's accessibility, as Mrs. Finch admitted, opened the door to other culprits. The fertilizer in Timothy's shed was another clue, though his recklessness made him an unlikely poisoner. Dr. Thorne's expertise remained troubling, but his bluntness clashed with the crime's theatrics. As evening fell, Miss Marple lit a lamp, its glow casting soft shadows across her parlor. The mystery was narrowing, the suspect's motives and opportunities coming into focus. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, who once said that village secrets were like weeds, persistent but uprootable with care. The key in her pocket felt heavy, a tangible link to the truth. Was it tied to the trophy, or something more significant? With patience and precision, Miss Marple would follow these threads, knowing that in St. Mary Mead, the truth was never far from the surface, hidden in the everyday rhythms of village life. Chapter 8. The Pattern Emerges. 8 days after the tragic poisoning of Colonel Hargrove at the St. Mary Mead village fête, the village seemed to hold its breath, its quaint lanes and thatched cottages steeped in an uneasy quiet. The September sun, low and golden, cast long shadows across the green, where the memory of the spectral phantom and the stolen silver trophy lingered like an unresolved chord. Miss Jane Marple, her white hair neatly pinned and her shawl draped with care, sat in her cottage parlor, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a counterpoint to the chill of the mystery that consumed her thoughts. The clues she had gathered, the white glove with L.V. initials, the small footprints in the churchyard, the bluish paintbrush, the scrap of white fabric, the smudge of powder, the silver key, and the fertilizer in Timothy's shed were threads in a tapestry nearing completion, and she sensed the pattern was finally emerging. Miss Marple's morning began with a purposeful walk to the church, where Vicar Samuel Layton was her vicar, and continued her walk, her thoughts turning to Miss Lydia Voss. The artist's painting of the phantom, so vivid and precise, suggested intimate knowledge, and the glove with her initials was a damning clue. Yet her calm demeanor at the vicarage tea hinted at either innocence or a masterful disguise. Her next destination was the schoolhouse, where Mrs. Eleanor Finch was correcting papers at her desk. The teacher's prim exterior belied the nervous energy Miss Marple had noted earlier. "Mrs. Finch," she began, her voice gentle, "you mentioned leaving your jam in the schoolhouse kitchen overnight. Was the room locked, or could anyone have entered?" Mrs. Finch's spectacles slipped slightly as she looked up. "It was unlocked, I'm afraid. The school is open to the community, and I didn't think, well, I never imagined such a thing." Miss Marple's eyes fell on the bottle of cyanide blue pigment, still on the shelf. "And this? Pigment used for art projects, I presume." "It's an unusual shade." Mrs. Finch flushed. "Yes, for the children's paintings. Miss Voss recommended it. She's been helping with art classes." The connection was subtle, but significant. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind racing. The pigment linked Mrs. Finch and Miss Voss, and the unlocked kitchen suggested opportunity for tampering. Yet Mrs. Finch's slip about tasting the jam untainted, she claimed, nagged at her. Was it a genuine mistake, or a lie to cover her tracks? As she crossed the green, Miss Marple spotted Dr. Elias Thorne emerging from his cottage, his medical bag in hand. She greeted him warmly, noting his guarded expression. "Dr. Thorne, your quick diagnosis at the fête was remarkable. Cyanide is not easily recognized, yet you were certain." The doctor's sharp beard twitched as he replied, "Years of practice, Miss Marple. The symptoms, convulsions, rapid collapse, are unmistakable. I only regret I couldn't save him." His sincerity seemed genuine, but Miss Marple detected a flicker of unease. His access to medical supplies made him a candidate for procuring cyanide, though his blunt manner clashed with the crime's theatricality. "Jam, of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I was merely curious about your uncle's trophies." The marrow cup, was it kept in a special case, perhaps with a lock? Timothy's brow furrowed. A case? Not that I know of. He kept his trophies on a shelf in the study. Why do you ask? Miss Marple noted his quick denial, a hint of nervousness in his posture. No reason, she said lightly, though the key I found suggests otherwise. Timothy's eyes widened briefly, but he recovered with a laugh. Village mysteries, eh? You'll have us all confessing to something. As she left, Miss Marple glanced at the gardening shed, where the fertilizer jar had caught her attention. Its chemical composition, potentially a source of cyanide, was a troubling link, though Timothy's impulsiveness seemed ill-suited to the crime's precision. The key, however, was a new piece of the puzzle, its purpose unclear but significant. Returning to the village, Miss Marple paused by the churchyard, where the phantom had emerged. The thorn bush, where she had found the white fabric, bore another clue. A tiny bead, iridescent and delicate, like those used in costume embroidery. It matched the glove's stitching, strengthening the connection to Miss Voss. She pocketed it, her mind weaving the clues together. The satchel, the painting, the glove, the bead all pointed to the artist, yet the schoolhouse's accessibility and the fertilizer suggested others had opportunity. At her cottage, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as her thoughts aligned. The pattern was emerging, the suspect's motives and actions forming a clearer picture. Miss Voss's painting and the glove were compelling, but her detachment suggested she might be a witness rather than the culprit. Mrs. Finch's unlocked kitchen and the pigment linked her to the poison, though her nervousness could stem from guilt or fear. Dr. Thorne's expertise was undeniable, but his bluntness clashed with the phantom's theatrics. Timothy's inheritance was a strong motive, yet his recklessness made him an unlikely poisoner. The key, however, was a breakthrough. Its lock might hold the secret to the trophy's theft. Satchel, the pigment, each was a stitch, and Miss Marple was close to completing the pattern. With patience and precision, she would follow these clues, knowing that in St. Mary Mead, the truth was hidden in the quiet details of everyday life, waiting to be uncovered by a mind attuned to its subtleties. Chapter 9. The Veil Lifts. 9 days after the chilling murder of Colonel Reginald Hargrove at the St. Mary Mead village fête, the village seemed to hold its collective breath, its quaint lanes and thatched cottages bathed in the soft glow of a September evening. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and late-blooming roses, but beneath the idyllic surface, tension simmered. Miss Jane Marple, her white hair neatly pinned and her shawl draped with care, stood at her cottage window, gazing across the green where the memory of the poisoned jam, the spectral phantom, and the stolen silver trophy lingered. Her knitting lay idle on the table, for her mind was wholly occupied with the puzzle's final pieces. The white glove with LV initials, the small footprints in the churchyard, the bluish paintbrush, the scrap of white fabric, the smudge of powder, the silver key, the iridescent bead, and the fertilizer in Timothy's shed had woven a complex tapestry. And tonight, Miss Marple was determined to lift the veil on the truth. The day had been one of quiet but purposeful action. Miss Marple had arranged a gathering at the vicarage, ostensibly to discuss the church restoration fund, but in truth, to bring the suspects together under her watchful eye. The vicar, Mrs. Finch, Dr. Thorne, Timothy Hargrove, and Miss Voss had all agreed to attend, unaware of the elderly spinster's intent to unravel the mystery. As dusk settled, Miss Marple arrived at the vicarage, her basket in hand, her demeanor as unassuming as ever. The parlor, with its crackling fire and familiar watercolors, was a cozy stage for the drama about to unfold. The guests assembled, their faces a study in guarded civility. Vicar Samuel Layton, his clerical collar slightly askew, poured tea. "Indeed, Inspector," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "The murder was no accident, nor was the phantom a ghost. It was a carefully staged act designed to distract from the poisoning of the jam. Let us consider the clues." She produced the white glove, its LV initials catching the firelight. "This was found near my gate, suggesting Miss Voss's involvement. Yet gloves can be planted, can they not?" Miss Voss's eyes widened, but she remained silent. Miss Marple continued, holding up the iridescent bead. "This, found in the churchyard, matches the glove stitching, as does a scrap of fabric nearby. A costume, perhaps, used by the phantom. And then there's the paintbrush, stained with cyanide blue, and a smudge of powder near the prize table, possibly cyanide, disguised as an innocent substance." Mrs. Finch gasped, her hand to her mouth. "My jam was pure. I tasted it the night before." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Yes, Mrs. Finch, you said so. Yet the schoolhouse kitchen where you left the jar was unlocked. Anyone could have tampered with it. And the pigment on your shelf, cyanide blue, recommended by Miss Voss, raises questions." Miss Voss's voice was sharp. "I only suggested it for the children's art. I had no part in this." Miss Marple nodded, turning to Dr. Thorne. "Your expertise, Doctor, identified the poison swiftly. Cyanide is not easily procured, yet your medical knowledge would allow it. And your dispute with the colonel over land was heated." Dr. Thorne's jaw tightened. "I'm a physician, not a murderer. I tried to save him." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "And you, Timothy, stand to inherit the estate, a powerful motive, especially with your debts. The fertilizer in your shed could yield cyanide, though your impulsiveness suggests a lack of the necessary precision." Timothy's face reddened. "I didn't need to kill him. My debts are manageable." Miss Marple raised a hand, producing the silver key. "This, found in the village hall, unlocks a truth. The stolen trophy was no mere bauble. I visited the Hargrove estate and found a locked case in the study, empty but for traces of silver polish. The trophy was taken not for where he kept the letters." "I didn't poison the jam." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "But you saw who did, didn't you? You were near the prize table, sketching, and you noticed someone tampering with the jam." Miss Voss's eyes filled with tears. "It was Mrs. Finch," she said, her voice breaking. "I saw her open the jar and add something, just before the judging. I was too frightened to speak. She's respected, and I'm an outsider." Mrs. Finch's face paled, her spectacles slipping. "That's a lie! I would never!" Miss Marple raised a hand. "Mrs. Finch, your insistence on tasting the jam was a mistake. You knew it was pure, because you added the poison afterward, using the cyanide blue from your shelf. The schoolhouse was unlocked, but you alone had reason to resent the colonel deeply. He refused your funding, humiliated you publicly, and your pride could not bear it." Mrs. Finch's shoulders slumped, her voice a whisper. "He mocked me, said I was unfit to teach. I only meant to make him ill, to show him he wasn't invincible. I didn't know the dose would kill him." Inspector Craddock stepped forward, his face grim. "Mrs. Finch, you'll need to come with me." As Mrs. Finch was led away, the room exhaled, the tension breaking like a wave. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "A sad affair," she said. "Pride and fear can drive even the most respectable to desperate acts." The vicar murmured a prayer. Dr. Thorne shook his head, and Timothy looked stunned. Miss Voss, tears streaming, clutched her sketchbook. "I should have spoken sooner," she said. "You've helped now," Miss Marple replied gently. "The truth, though painful, sets us free." As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple stepped into the cool evening air, her mind at peace. The phantom had been unmasked, the poison traced, and the trophy's secret revealed. She recalled her friend Mrs. Bantry's words. Village crimes were like tangled wool, unraveling with patience. The key, the glove, the bead, all had led her to the truth, hidden in the every. Understanding the why and how was as vital as the unmasking itself. Today, over tea, she would lay bare the threads of the mystery, stitching them into a coherent whole. The parlor, with its chintz curtains and polished oak furniture, was a haven of comfort, its familiarity a balm to the village's shaken spirit. The guests arrived promptly at 10 o'clock. Inspector Craddock, his youthful face etched with gratitude. Vicar Samuel Layton, his gentle demeanor restored. Dr. Elias Thorne, his sharp features softened by relief. Timothy Hargrove, his usual charm tempered by introspection. And Miss Lydia Voss, her bohemian scarf a quiet nod to her artistic soul. Mrs. Eleanor Finch, now in custody, was absent, her confession the key that had unlocked the case. Miss Marple poured tea from a silver pot, her movements deliberate, her eyes twinkling with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice as soft as the steam rising from her cup. The events at the Fête were a dark chapter for St. Mary Mead, but the truth has emerged, as it always does, from the everyday details we so often overlook. Inspector, perhaps you'd like to hear the full account? Craddock nodded, his notebook open but his attention fixed on her. Miss Marple, your insight was invaluable. Please, explain how you pieced it together. Miss Marple sipped her tea, hugging to the fire. The murder of Colonel Hargrove was no random act, nor was the phantom a supernatural whim. It was a carefully orchestrated crime, rooted in human frailty, pride, resentment, and fear. Let us begin with the clues. She reached into her basket, producing the white glove with LV initials. This, found near my gate, pointed to Miss Voss, yet its placement was too convenient, suggesting it was planted to mislead. The scrap of white fabric and iridescent bead from the churchyard confirmed a costume used by the phantom to create chaos. Miss Voss, your painting of the phantom was too precise, revealing you had seen it firsthand. Miss Voss's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. I confessed last night I wore the cloak to steal. Thorne's brow furrowed. But why Mrs. Finch? She's so respectable.
Miss Marple's eyes softened. Respectability can mask deep wounds, Doctor. Mrs. Finch's dispute with the Colonel over school funds was more than a disagreement. He humiliated her publicly, calling her unfit to teach, wounding her pride. She admitted she meant only to make him ill, to prove he wasn't invincible. But her dose was fatal. Pride, you see, can drive even the most upright to desperate acts. Timothy shifted uncomfortably.
And the trophy?
Why steal it if Miss Voss was after her letters? Miss Marple produced the silver key, its intricate design glinting. This key, found in the village hall, unlocked the truth. The trophy was no mere prize. It concealed the Colonel's blackmail letters, stored in a locked case in his study. Miss Voss stole it to protect her past, unaware that Mrs. Finch had used the chaos to poison the jam. The trophy's theft was a separate act, but it muddied the waters, making the phantom seem central to the murder. The vicar's mild eyes widened. So the phantom was Miss Voss, and the poison was Mrs. Finch. Two crimes intertwined by chance? Precisely, Miss Marple said. The phantom's appearance, timed during the judging, created the perfect distraction for Mrs. Finch to tamper with the jar. She knew the Colonel would sample it, as he always did. The footprints in the churchyard, small and deliberate, were hers, not Miss Voss's. She wore smaller shoes to mislead. The bluish paintbrush and powder were traces of her preparation, using the pigment to disguise the cyanide. Craddock leaned forward, his pen still. And the vial in the vestry? That led us to the vicar. A cruel misdirection, Miss Marple replied. Mrs. Finch placed it there, knowing the vicar's dispute with the Colonel would make him a plausible suspect. His trembling hands, however, made him an unlikely poisoner. She underestimated how quickly we'd see through it. Dr. Thorne shook his head. I suspected Timothy with his debts. or even myself, given my knowledge of poisons. Miss Marple's smile was kind. Your expertise, Doctor, made you a candidate, but your bluntness clashed with the crime's theatrics.
Ruined everything. You spoke when it mattered, Miss Marple replied, and St. Mary Mead will heal, as it always does. As the guests sipped their tea, the parlor filled with a gentle warmth, the weight of the mystery lifting. Craddock closed his notebook, his respect for Miss Marple evident. You've a gift, Miss Marple. The village owes you a debt. She waved a hand, her needles resuming their rhythm. Nonsense, Inspector. I merely observe what others overlook. Village life is a tapestry, and every thread, every glance, every slip tells a story. The gathering dispersed, each guest stepping into the morning light with a renewed sense of peace. Miss Marple lingered, tidying the tea things, her mind at rest. She recalled her friend Mrs. Bantry's words. Village secrets were like weeds, persistent but uprootable with care. The glove, the key, the bead, the pigment, all had led her to the truth, hidden in the everyday rhythms of St. Mary Mead. As she returned to her knitting, the fire's glow casting soft shadows, Miss Marple felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The phantom was unmasked, the poison traced, and the village restored to its gentle cadence. With a final sip of tea, she smiled, knowing that in St. Mary Mead, the truth was never far from the surface, waiting for a patient hand to weave its threads into clarity. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining the Phantom of the Village Fête. We hope Miss Marple's tale warmed your heart. Till next time, farewell.